This video is sponsored by spoilers. Click away now and get a 100% off guarantee for spoilers for both Last of Us games. So speaking of both Last of Us games, I beat both the Last of Us games. I'll admit, I've never been a big fan of games that lead more into the story unless they're on gameplay. I was under the assumption that I would just be watching cutscenes all game. But no, these games are really freaking good. See, I'm of the opinion that The Last of Us 1 is mostly perfect. But if you've played these games, you didn't come here to hear me talk about The Last of Us 1. You came here to hear me talk about The Last of Us Part 2. Now, when I finished the first game, did I think to myself, I want a sequel? If I'm being honest, no. I thought the first game had a perfect story, it had a few loose ends that a sequel could explore, but some things are good with loose ends. I mean, take the ending of Inception. Do you need an Inception sequel? No, you don't. When I finished the first game, I did not think it needed a sequel, but that doesn't necessarily mean that a sequel is impossible. So I was gonna give the sequel a chance, but I was staying a little bit skeptical. So, did The Last of Us Part 2 justify it continuing the story? Before I answer that, I should probably explain the, situation with this game. For any Star Wars fans watching, to put it simply, this game is the last Jedi of video games. It is so controversial and divisive that it is impossible to have an unpopular opinion about this game. There's people calling it absolute crap, and there's people calling it the best sequel ever made. And obviously both these statements are very over-exaggerated. So back to the question. Did The Last of Us Part 2 justify its continuation of the story? Yes. Yes, it did. For the most part. See, this game is really freaking good. Up until it isn't, and then it's really freaking meh. But then it's really freaking good again. And if you've played the game, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. The problem with the game is not the story itself, but how the story is being told. It's just being told in such a disjointed and entangled way. It's not that it's confusing, it's just that you could be playing a segment and you would immediately think to yourself, this should have came earlier, or maybe this should have came later. No, I didn't want it to be told in perfect chronological order, but god damn it, dude, the pacing is awful. So this is your final spoiler warning for the story. Yes, I'm going to spoil the story now so I can talk about it. So if you don't want it spoiled, go away. Let's start off easy and begin with the positive. Joel's death makes complete sense and is handled perfectly. It's emotional, it's sad, it motivates the entire plot, and it affects every character in some way. It's a little odd that Tommy is this bloodthirsty up until we last see him in the game, but whatever. I really like Ellie and Dina. I think their little conversations throughout the first half of the story are really fun. I know some people don't personally like Dina herself. I mean, I liked her in the game, but like, come on guys. We have bigger things to complain about. I also really like how Ellie becomes more reflectant of Joel. I also really like how this aspect is presented in many different ways. There's this fun little scene where Joel teaches her how to play guitar, but she also takes on the bad traits of Joel. She has to get more comfortable with killing people that might not deserve it, which is something that Joel did in the last game all the time. I also really like the scene where she tries to do the double interrogation method that we see Joel and Tommy do. I'll get into Ellie's character more later, but these are just some of the basics on how well she's handled in this game. But a lot of my praise for this game is in direct connection to the criticism that this game gets. So this is a perfect transition point into the stuff that I don't like. Like I said, the big issue here is that the story is being told in a weird way. The first few hours are actually pretty good. It's the actual start of the game and we cut back and forth between Ellie and Abby. Then the next 10 hours are separated into 3 different chapters which represent 3 different days in Seattle. And like I said, Ellie's half of the story is really freaking good. But then it reaches its climax where Ellie and Abby meet. But then we rewind all the way back those 3 days into Abby's perspective. Now on paper, this would be so cool and super interesting. Although only an hour in, you will soon realize that Abby's story is so boring and so uninteresting. And it progressively gets worse and worse and worse and worse. This is due to the fact that I just don't care about any of the characters in her story. And that's because I already fought and killed them as Ellie in her story, so why would I care about them? Now, it is 100% possible to write an interesting character whose death is predetermined, which makes me more mad because we could have had interesting characters. Abby's half of the story being bad is also due to the fact that the plot is A, awful, and B, has nothing to do with Ellie's story. So while Ellie is on her lesbian murder rampage, we are playing as Abby, fighting a religious jungle cult, which ultimately culminates into Abby fighting Jeffrey Wright in a crumbling, burning village. Like, what is happening? And all of this is extra depressing because Abby herself is actually a really interesting character. One of the best flashbacks in the entire game is showing Abby's perspective of the ending of the last game. This is her core motivation for why she kills Joel, but it's only shown to us halfway through the game. Imagine if this was the opening of the game. It would serve as a perfect transition to the actual opening. This is getting back to my point of the structure of this game just being bad. The solution is very simple. Just have the Seattle portion of the game be cutting back and forth between Ellie and Abby. Or just rewrite Abby's story as a whole, or at least connect it to Ellie's story. Because as it stands, if I'm ever replaying this game, I'm just gonna stop once I get to Abby's section of the story. Although the messy structure goes way beyond Abby's half of the game. I really want to talk about this scene in specific. Let me start off by explaining all the important stuff that happens in this scene. We are introduced to two main characters. Well, one main character in Jesse. It also establishes Ellie and Dina as a couple, which I don't know if you guys know this, but is very important. It also establishes that Ellie is pissed off at Joel, which I don't know if you guys know this, but is very important. Now, I would say that all of this is going to be important later, but it's actually important way earlier. Now, I want you guys to guess when this flashback is shown to us. Is it A, at the beginning of the game where it's actually taking place? Or B, in the last few hours of the game for no reason? Well, there's a logical answer. And there's this flashback being shown to us in the last few hours of the game for no reason. This scene shouldn't be shown as a flashback, it should have been shown to us at the start of the game. All of these things could have been established way earlier instead of us learning about it way after they're relevant to the plot. Although the structure of the game does sometimes work towards its benefit. This is especially apparent in the case of Ellie's flashbacks of Joel. I like how each flashback, their relationship progressively gets worse until it ultimately leads up to Joel admitting his lie to Ellie. The first flashback is honestly the cutest thing I've ever seen, and yeah, maybe this would have been better for the opening, but like, whatever. The second one, we actually see their relationship starting to break as Ellie becomes more suspicious. And obviously, the third one is where Joel does the thing. This was a big moment that was inevitable that they were gonna have to do, and it is executed very well. So overall, those are just my personal praises and criticisms of the game. But obviously, you can't talk about this game without talking about what everyone else thinks about it. Like I said, this is the last Jedi of video games. How could a piece of fictional media cause so much controversy? Well, in the case of The Last Jedi, it's not a type of movie that you would traditionally get out of Star Wars. Star Wars is very simplistic. It's always been about good versus evil. So a movie that explores something way beyond that basic concept is a tough pill to swallow. And it's a similar case with The Last of Us Part 2. See, this game is really freaking depressing. You really feel the emotional dread and turmoil of the characters, and I love it. It goes full Empire Strikes Back, except instead of the Empire striking back, the Empire is torturing you in your that thing. There is no hope or triumph in this narrative, and this is something that I've never experienced. It is just the brutal and harsh reality of this post-apocalyptic world. But why didn't we have this in the first game? The first game was set in this exact same post-apocalyptic setting, but it wasn't as dark or as miserable as this game. This was all due to Joel and Ellie's dynamic. It was cute and fun to watch them develop this relationship in this setting, and it led to the game having a very heartwarming story. But Part 2 does a complete 180, and it's obviously intentional. Joel's death is what changes the entire narrative. This is getting back to my point of how well his death is handled and how much sense it makes. It doesn't just affect the characters and the plot, it affects everything. So this miserable narrative was not something that you would be expecting as a sequel from Last of Us Part 1. And it's totally fine to not prefer a dark and miserable tone, but you have to judge this game differently than you did the first one. So no more stalling, we're gonna move on to the actual criticism that this game gets. Abby is a bad character because she killed Joel. Yeah, well, boo freaking who, guys? This is something that a lot of people don't seem to understand, is that there is a difference between a good character and a good person. Abby is not a good person. In fact, there is not a single good person in this entire series, because murder is just a survival norm in this world. But that's okay, because the series is obviously not trying to get us to morally agree with these characters. Now, yeah, Abby is a way less interesting character than Ellie, but that's for other reasons. Now, yeah, guys, I get it. Everyone has that one character that they just hate no matter what. For me, it was Ponkrell. I just hate him. No matter what, I just hate him. But I have to admit, he is a good character. You have to have an actual reason for calling someone a bad character, and them doing a bad thing is just stupid. Jesse is a flat and pointless side character. Yeah, I agree. The ending sucks because Ellie doesn't kill Abby. Now this one, I see a lot. People like to call this game a revenge story, which, come on guys. This is not a revenge story, this is a story about forgiveness. This is shown to us at the very start of the game. Ellie fails to forgive Seth. Think about it, guys. What other narrative purpose does this scene serve? I mean, what other narrative purpose does this scene serve?
Bote sex time.
This needs to stop now!
Both Ellie and Abby suffer tremendously because of their revenge. Abby loses all of her friends and is literally enslaved. Ellie loses the one person that still loves her and is left with nothing. Their choices have devastating consequences, and this game shows that their revenge is an endless cycle of violence that only ends with forgiveness, which is exactly what Joel and Ellie's conversation was about. I personally love this ending. It truly left me heartbroken. Like, I was actually upset for like a week after I finished the game. And this is exactly what a story should do. So apparently this game beat Ghost of Tsushima for Game of the Year. See, now that's some bullshit. And here's a teaser for what's coming next. Thanks for watching my YouTube videos. Bye.